Hi, and welcome to Chopping Wealth. I am Brian Portnoy, CEO and founder of Shaping Wealth. And Chopping Wealth is a regular feature on our Compass content platform. I am thrilled today to have as my guest Carl Richards. Carl, we were just talking offline. Has been a major influence on my career and has been a major influence on our industry. Um, he has a new book out that we're going to be talking about in a great deal of depth. Carl, welcome. For maybe the one person who's not heard of you before, why don't you give us a brief introduction?
Yeah, well, Brian, first of all, thank you. Thanks for inviting me. Every time you and I talk, I've enjoyed it and the sort of level of depth that we get into. So thank you. In terms of introduction, probably the easiest place to start is I, I, I mean, I've told this story so many times, but I applied to be a security guard in college. It turns out the ad said securities, not security. I didn't know the difference. That's how I got the job at Fidelity Investments. So I got into this industry quite by accident, right? But I've stayed mainly because of the kind of work you do, like our endless fascination with the human component of it. And that fascination led me to start writing a bit about it. I went to work for a big brokerage firm, then I left and started my own RIA. And along the way, I started writing about this sort of astonishing um, surprises about our own interaction. Like I thought money was math, right? And then I kept running into my own experiences, and then I kept watching clients have similar experiences, and the role of empathy and fear and greed, and all those sort of behavioral things that we've all pointed to for the last couple of decades. Um, and along the way, the writing I did got picked up by some newspapers, and that led to a book, the first book and a second book. And so I sold my financial planning firm, my RA, what would that be now? About 14 or 15 years ago. And I've just been sort of writing and speaking and traveling since.
Well, I'll probably say it multiple times. Thank you for the work that you do for all of us. Tell us about the new book. Give us the title, the availability, and then I want to dive into a bunch of different topics.
Sure. So the new book is out on October 21st, which from time of recording is 6 days from now. So it's like the countdown. Um, it's called Your Money, Reimagining Wealth Through 101 Simple Sketches. And it's been 11 years since my last book. And I've been resisting writing another one because I've just been leaning into conversations. Like I've just loved, the podcast world and workshops and like human interaction and conversations like this one. And almost a month hasn't gone by in the 11 years where somebody hasn't said, my agent or publishers or whatever said, like, when are you going to write another book? And I finally, maybe like 4 years ago, I started noticing that I was kept getting these emails about people who would say, like, I've printed out this sketch and I've taped it to the fridge in the break room. And none of these emails said, it's so visually striking. None of them talked about the art of it. They all said, you wouldn't believe the conversations it starts. And I was like, oh, interesting. I want to have more conversations. I've been resisting writing a book. What if I wrote a book specifically with the goal? Like the book is just a means to an end. The end is more conversation. So if I thought about it as a conversation grenade that you sort of toss into a room and conversations break out everywhere, that's why I ended up writing the book. And so it's 101 of the sketches with 101 essays. Some of the essays are 2 sentences. None of them take more than 3 minutes to read. It's just meant to ask a lot of questions.
So you mentioned the phrase that I wanted to start with. You right off the top say the book is a conversation grenade. What is it that you want to blow up?
Yeah, yeah. It's funny. I've struggled a bit with that analogy because I don't like so much of what's implied with the word grenade. But somebody, when I was struggling with this, one of my friends said, "Hey, we use the word love bomb all the time." And I'm like, okay. The idea is, it's not that I want to, it's such a good question, actually, because I've never thought about it that way. What the way I was thinking about it is you toss this into a room and conversations break out. But if I was to answer your question, if I was thinking about what I want to blow up, it's the same tired conversation. We think what I want to blow up is what we think it means to talk about money. What we think it means is the financial pornography network waving our hands, yelling and screaming about buy, buy, sell, sell, or maybe even the best budgeting app or the best credit card. I want to blow that. Those are important conversations, don't get me wrong, but they're only important to the degree that we've gotten clear about why we're doing these things in the first place, right? Like an endless debate about what car to take on a trip or whether to take a plane, a train, or an automobile. Useful. You know what's more useful is like, hey, where are you going? Right? Where are you going first? So that's what I would say, look, I want to blow up what it means to talk about money.
Yeah, and I really appreciate that. And I think, sort of somewhat parallel careers and firms and all that. I mean, we can probably get relatively deep on behavioral finance, applied neuroscience, positive psychology, fascinating disciplines with real world implications for leading a better life. But I think we can abstract from those complexities and just say that what we're trying to do here is have better conversations with the people we care about the things that really matter. And it's often hard to have those conversations absent the topic of money, which we know is the number one most uncomfortable topic in people's lives. We know our friends' health status, relationship status. We don't have the first clue how much they make or what their balance sheet looks like. We just never go there.
Yeah. Yeah. And largely because, I mean, I went down a rabbit hole once trying to figure out where that started, where the idea of money, sex, politics, and religion, you don't talk about them in polite company. And we all know the last taboo seems to be money because all the other things are being talked about ad nauseum, like too much. But I was trying to figure out like where did that start? And there seems to be some pointing to sort of like the landed people ending like land barons, like really wealthy early aristocracy, um not wanting the serfs that took care of the land to talk too much about it, right? Like there seems to be something pointing to that early on where it became uncouth, like improper. We don't talk about such things. And then we just carried that on for some reason. And then it's become so wrapped up in stories that like if you knew how much I made, you'd suddenly find yourself in this really weird comparison game. We would find ourselves in this really weird comparison game. We'd quickly insert a substitute for happiness. Like they make a lot of money, they must be happier, which is obviously wrong on so many ways. But and then we realize what we're actually comparing. We're trying. I think. Sorry, this is a tangent a little bit, but I think what we're competitive beings, like resource competitive, just because it used to mean staying alive, and to some degree it still does, right? But for all of us, it used to mean staying alive. And I think we're trying to compare ourselves. How much do you have? How much do I have? And I think what we're trying to compare is happy. Like, but there's no unit of measure, right? I can't say like I have 72 happy and you have 27 happy. Like there's no unit. And so I think we make a substitute for how much money do you have. But the only thing we have to compare money is actually not even something you and I could call net worth. We only have consumption because it's all we see, right? If you drive a fancier car, I'm immediately assuming you have a lot of money, which we know is
Not necessarily the case.
it's not necessarily, it's often not the case. And then even if we knew how much money you have, we don't know how happy you are. So we're like, as the kids say, turtles all the way down, right? Like it's just terrible comparison set. So I think that's how we got into this problem.
So I'm going to circle back around in a bit toward scarcity, abundance, the concept of enough. But I wanted to start with a foundational question that you posed at the top of the book, and I'm going to ask you directly, which is, what's the first thing that comes to mind when you think about money?
It's so interesting. I just did a presentation for a couple hundred people and I asked that question and then somebody asked me. Um, yeah, and so it's fresh on my mind. It it I, I'm trying to be honest about this and like get rid of some of the stories because I've been asked this question a couple of times. I've thought about this question a lot. I may not have been asked a lot, but I've thought about it a lot. And the first thing that comes, but it's getting a little deeper, which is because of the work I've been doing on it. The first thing that really does come is still a little bit of scarcity, still a little bit of fear around like tomorrow's going to be the day it all goes away. But that's deeper. Like if you'd asked me this 10 years ago, I would just be like raging scarcity. And it's not because I have more money, because I don't know if I actually do. I haven't spent the time to look, but it's because of the other work I've done around it. So now I'm starting to feel like when I think of money, now I'm starting to feel like interesting conversation comes up, like portal to the soul, money, meaning. And then I'm hoping, when I asked this question last week at a conference, some older gentleman in the back raised his hand and said, "I don't feel anything. I feel neutral." And I was sort of like, that's kind of, in the end, like our most enlightened state around money should probably be neutral tool, right? Because that's what it actually is. The only job it can actually do is neutral tool.
It could be seen as in service to something, and then you fill in the blank, which is which would probably be a remarkable place to be. It's sort of it's an extension that I can't imagine many people get to. I think there would be a visceral, emotional, physiological reaction to, hey, what do you think about, what do you think about money? Because the way you put it in your book, what's the first thing that comes to mind when you think about money? I think that's an elegant way to put it. You could just ask someone even more crudely, what do you think of money? And then you're completely untethered. Like, what could that possibly mean? And it would probably trigger people in different ways.
No, I love that. I love that. I've been thinking a lot about it in relation to like what are the jobs you've given it, right? Right? Because I'm sort of recently I've been playing the game where I imagine money came in and sat down in the room, and I got to ask it questions like what would I ask it? But then I recently started extending that, saying, what would it say to me? Like if money was here, what would it say to me? And where my head has gone lately has been, I imagine money as a really earnest but terribly disappointed golden retriever. The kind, like a golden retriever is always so happy, just wants to please you. And it's disappointed because it says something like, "Hey, you gave me all these jobs." Like that whole thing with enough and happiness, security, love. You gave me all these jobs. You can't do them. Right? Like, I'm sorry. I wish I could have provided enough for you, or security for you, or made you self-esteem for you, or love or happiness. I can't. Turns out I'm just zeros and ones in the cloud. That to me is an interesting experience.
You say in the book at one point, I think it was set, you number all the drawings. So I think it was number 11. You talk about scarcity and abundance and the relationship between those two, and our definitions or our understanding of those, of scarcity and abundance as a function of perspective. When you use the word, when you say our understanding of scarcity and abundance are a function of perspective, what do you mean by that? Because I think the null hypothesis, if you will, would be, well, scarcity means I don't have much. I'm hungry. I'm cold. Things are scarce. Abundance, I'm in the lap of luxury. I'm in the throne. I'm eating big turkey legs. I'm rich.
With my hands.
Yeah, yeah. Henry the whatever. We're thinking about, sort of some gross, some gross imagery there. But I have a sense of where you're going when you talk about the perspective. I mean, you've seen the data. We've all, I think, seen the data that over the last 250 years, we've gone from 90% of the world's population living on less than $2 a day to less than 8 or 7% of being in abject poverty. So in that very literal sense, we can call that better, we can call that improvement, but we still struggle with scarcity versus abundance. It's a function of perspective. So tell us more.
Yeah, it's such a what a great question. Thanks for taking the time to dig in to get to that point.
I read your book and I've been tracking your work for 15 years.
Yeah, to nail down, it's just like frankly humbled by that. Let me see if this story works because it's what first came to mind. Was I remember reading this story and it was 20 years ago, so I can't I'm going to leave out any guesses about it. It was somewhere in Florida. It was a hurricane and two houses both taken out. And the interviewer had the newspaper article was had talked to two different families, and this was not the point of the article. The article was just reporting on the hurricane, but I noticed these two different statements. One was like, you know, upset and I'm, by the way, I'm not faulting anyone here because I would probably feel a bit of both, and on my good day I would hope I would be the latter, and my normal days I'd probably be the first. Angry, mad, we've lost everything, a little bit about, how could God do this to us, the blaming of some object A. And the second person that they talked to, or another person they talked to in the article, was like, I can't believe my family's all safe. Right. Like we're all together, we're going to put things back together. And I don't, and again, I would probably, my natural state would probably be the first, like I would be angry and upset. But it's just so interesting to me when you put two people in a very similar situation and one of them feels like they have enough and more, and the other feels like they don't, and they're in the same situation. Now, again, I'm making a lot of assumptions. Maybe the one family had a bunch of money somewhere, and I don't know, but we could come up with lots of stories about that. Another one that's interesting to me is for the 50 Fires show, our first iteration of that was to try and find the people we were calling the Wizards of Enough. And my creative partners were like, well, who are these people? And I was like, I think I've had as many conversations about money as anybody, and I've only run into a handful of them. And we started thinking, well, okay, how much money do they have? And we were like, let's talk with a bunch of people with lots of money. And universally, they like none of them felt like they had enough. And then we all know the stories. Like, people who have almost nothing and are seen, and they're acting and they're saying words as if they have enough. That only leads me to one conclusion. And I know it's simple and we're leaving out a lot of nuance here, but it's a matter of perspective. Like, I can choose, I have two choices. I can choose to focus on what I already have. My wife said this to me the other day. I was complaining about something, as I do. And she was like, hey, there was a little bit of this, like, hey, stop your complaining in her voice. But she said something like, if somebody were to follow you around and to take a picture of your life and put it on Instagram, you would be jealous. So I think that's an example of, like, my perspective was focused on what I didn't have. And the sketch for that, Scarcity's got those really a bunch of loops around it and the arrows pointing in. And I think there's this inward perspective of what I don't have, and focus on me. And abundance to me is a focus. It's open, it's expansive, and a focus on others. Like, how could I help? How could I be helpful? Not what others have, but how could I be helpful? So that's kind of what I'm trying to point to.
So I wanna lean into a one word that you used in just now, which is choose or choice. You said that we have a choice of perspective. Do you, generally speaking, think that we humans have more agency in money life than we think we might?
Man, what a great question. Yeah, because and let me be clear. This is exactly what I hoped the book would do, is start the kind of conversations that I don't know that we can resolve. right? And that we would, you're very good at this, we would be okay in the tension. Um, but if I were to state what I am, my operating assumption on this is that I do have more choice. Where I struggle with this abundance and scarcity thing is the juvenile version of it that we all know causes so many problems. The worst culprit of this is The Secret, that book, pointing at something that is true and really valuable. Law of attraction, abundance mindset. That's incredibly important. It's a correct principle, but they were pointing at the juvenile version. Like, if I just buy a Bentley, the universe will pay for it. I don't want to say that. But what I do think is, like, on a day-to-day basis, can I cultivate? I love that word, right? Can I cultivate a habit of, and there's a lot that goes into this. Like, I don't want to beat myself up for feeling, scarce or fearful. I want to actually treat that with some empathy to myself and say, but I think it's now maladaptive. Like, I'm not competing for resources to keep my family alive, right? So that adaptive behavior of even the fear, the scarcity, that at one point was kept me alive probably as a species. And now I can turn to it and say, hey, thank you. You've been really helpful. And I see you. And I can turn forward and say, but we've got it from here. And decide to cultivate that reaction. So I'm going to rewire it slowly with lots of generosity and empathy. I'm going to rewire. I do think we have a choice to do that, to rewire the response from scarce fear to I'm okay, I have enough, and I'm abundant.
I mean, I do think that there's no getting away from the evolutionary chain. I do think that anybody who's on the planet today is the product of ancestors who fought hard to stay alive, and that our genetic makeup is reflective of that. And we know if you walk into a room, a warm, well-lit room with a buffet with our King Henry eating turkey legs, if anything's even remotely wrong, Carl, you know it in a second, in a millisecond. Something's off. We still have that wiring, and I think part of what you've been working on, and I think what I've been grappling with for a long time now, is that the brain is still relying on that survival instinct while mucking around with this relatively brand new thing called money. So we've had exchange of, different forms for more than 3,000 years, but we haven't had this physical thing in the middle. Now it's a digital thing in the virtual middle, that is intermediating that proclivity toward fear and potential harm. It just I couldn't imagine a stage of our humanity where that fear instinct goes away and money doesn't trigger it. So perhaps it's our job to create the vocabulary because, I don't think anyone speaks the language of money fluently. In some sense, what we are is teaching the vocabulary and grammar and syntax of money so that people can do as best as they can, which is never going to be perfect. It might not even be enough. But it's like going to the doctor and saying, I'm in pain. And she says, well, is it sharp pain or dull pain? I don't know. Upper body, lower body. I'm not really sure. The physician's not going to be able to help you. In money life, if we don't have the words, we can't provide the healing. I want to
Let me just, Brian, real quickly. One thing that's very interesting to me too is it would be particularly unhelpful for the physician to say, well, stop feeling that pain.
yeah, exactly.
Stop. Make a choice. Just choose to not feel the pain. And literally, like, that's just a problem with your thinking. If you just thought better thoughts, you wouldn't feel that pain anymore. And that's where we get a lot of the people in the abundance world. You're like, oh, just change your thinking and that is not, and you weren't implying this anyway. That's definitely not what you and I are saying. But I do think I actually don't want the fear to go away. I just want to be better about its appropriate use, right? There are times, right? Like, I'm just writing it, like Elizabeth Gilbert says, fear can come on the trip, it just can't drive. I love the idea of being like, sort of like I had like Thursday mornings when the New York Times column was my deadline for the Times column for 10 years, every Thursday morning, I would feel the same threat. Like I'm going to hit send, and Ron's going to tell me this is the editor there is going to tell me that's the end of the sketch guy. And then I sometimes would like be typing. This is my typing motion. I would be typing, and I would find myself turning to the left where the door was, as if there was a embodied fear there. And I would just say to it, hey, I totally get, lions in the bush and all that stuff, but I'm just writing an email. Like, so trying to teach it. But when I'm up in the mountains and something's a little off, like you mentioned the buffet, I'm backcountry ski a lot. If I'm on a slope and you feel that same feeling like something's a little off, I want to say, hey, bro, so glad you're here, man. What are you seeing? Right? So I don't want it to go away. I just want to remodulate it for its appropriate use in today's world based on there are some people who are in roles even at work where only the paranoid survive. That Andy Grove book drives me crazy because it made it so popular. But there are some people where that's appropriate. It's just not most of us. It's just not most of us.
Yeah. You were centering on the word fear. I would just broaden it to emotions more generally. I mean, I think about, sort of my first half of my career was on the investment side of things, had nothing to do with financial advice, wealth management. And the common refrain was, well, we need to take the emotions out of investing, which to me is like taking the gravity out of the room. It's not a thing. Like it's just here. In fact, what we know from neuroscience is that emotion precedes cognition, and that emotion is such a powerful source of information. Even those gut instincts, interoception is the new word. Um, there is information in there, and so this allows me to pivot to where I want to go next with you, because I'm really curious to get your answers to this. And I'm going to use I want to I'm sort of skipping rocks across a still lake. Now we will focus on the word choose. Now we're going to focus on the word cultivate, and I want to talk about financial advice. And I want to talk about what you mean by real financial advice, or real financial planning. What does that mean? And what is the job to be done by the modern financial advisor? And I'm going to ask a question in a lousy way by offering an opinion, which is that perspective on agency that I raised. I think part of what the modern advisor does is inspire agency in their clients to have a broader sense of control over what seems uncontrollable. So I'm not saying you need to go that way. Let's just start with the open-ended question, something you've been writing about for a long time. What is real financial planning here in 2025?
I love that. And I should first just say I am often wrong, but almost never in doubt. So, who am I to define what real everybody can have their own definition, but my version of it is um, the sort of never-ending process of aligning your use of I think of this as a Venn diagram, your use of capital with what's important to you. And capital almost always has an asterisk in my mind, and the asterisk says money, energy, time, and attention. So four sources of capital: money, energy, time, and attention. So aligning your use of capital with what's important to you, to me, that's and by the way, never ending process of real financial planning. Now, of course, that involves a bunch of tactical skills, technical and tactical skills, and the spreadsheet and the calculator are super important. And I've been accused of downplaying their value, and I want to make sure that's clear for the record that if I ever did that, I didn't mean to. But it's two things can be true at the same time. The technical tactical skills or spreadsheets and calculators are very important, and they don't matter at all if we don't get the other thing right. Right? Where are you going? Why does it matter? Your use of aligning your use of capital with what's important to you. They one without the other, we end up in all this conversation I'm having more often than the most frequent conversation I'm having right now is the 45 to 55-year-old master of the universe showing up in Park City, Utah, where I live, having read the column, sends an email, can we get together for coffee? We sit down, and they look around to make sure nobody's listening. And then they show some evidence of having won, like an income statement or a balance sheet. Then they look around again to make sure no one's listening, and they say, is this all there is? I got to the top of the mountain and there's nothing there. So aligning your use of, getting really good at your use of capital without aligning with what's important to you means you might get to if you're lucky, I guess, you get to the top of the mountain and realize it's just void. So that to me is real financial planning. And then to what you're pointing to is this idea that that's this never ending ongoing series of choices. It's just to me, it's a spiritual practice of exercising, I'm going to use your word here, exercising agency with how I spend, exercising agency with how I invest, exercising agency with how I talk about money with my family or my spouse or my partner. And I'm going to get that wrong most of the time. And when I get it wrong, I'm going to say, how was I wrong? And I'm going to correct. That's why it's this never ending process of being a little less wrong tomorrow rather than being precisely correct today. Right? That's how I think about it. How's that?
It's good. I mean, you keep opening doors I want to go to, and we only have 9 hours to record. So,
That's right. That's right. That's right.
yeah, part of the challenge is, when you talk about the sources of capital, you're just so spot on because, obviously the epicenter of financial advice is your financial capital. But what's implicated is all of the other things, our relationships, our energy, our time. I can't remember the framework.
Attention.
Attention. Yeah. What's the difference between energy and attention?
It's just really, I've been spending a lot of time with that. It's a really, really poignant question.
As I think about my own stuff, I tend to I think about time and then energy slash attention. So maybe a side note. How do you do that?
No, yeah, here's one quick sort of like metaphor, if you will, for it. I could take my one of my kids skiing and I would be spending time with them. It would have cost some money, so I would have just a stupid amount of money these days. I would have spent some money. It's going to be physical, so I would have spent some energy. And it's quite possible I could spend all three of those things and not actually be there, like in my head, right? Thinking about work the whole time. My daughter, if I'm skiing with my daughter, we all know the difference of spending time with somebody who's paying attention and somebody who's not. And I actually would go like just quickly on attention. Like I was noticing recently that the wealthiest people in our world today are not railroad barons. They're tyrant. They're uh, not tyrants. They're masters of attention. They're titans of attention. What they sell is attention, right? They sell your and my attention. Facebook, I would argue even Musk, like any of those, Bezos, they're selling your and my collective attention as the current. So all that points to me is all that means is it must have some value. Apparently, it's valuable. And so then I start to think, yeah, well, last bit on this. I start to think that um, the the currency with which we invest in good relationships is attention. Like the cost you pay for a great experience, even by yourself, is paying attention. I love all that language. Like, pay attention, Brian.
Yeah, but I hope people are picking up on almost like the lilt to the word pay. It's financial. You're paying attention. Because it's global audience, but in America, we just allied sort of, oh, we're paying attention. And it's almost like one long word. But what you're, I think, wonderfully isolating is no, we have an attention capacity.
Maybe an attention budget.
We have an attention budget. This is my friend, industry friend Kyla Scanlon, her work on the attention economy is brilliant in this regard because it's where we're at. It's the last frontier. It's not that we're going to talk about AI today, but it's sort of what's potentially scary about AI is that it is replacing our minds, not our bodies. And so this attention economy is it feels profoundly different because, like you say, we have that attention budget and we choose, if we have agency, to spend it. And I know personally, scrolling through my phone, I'm just giving up my attention for free. It's been sucked in. The titans that you've referred to, they're very good at taking my attention without my permission, but that's just the nature of it.
That's right. So to your earlier question, I can spend energy and not attention, and the texture of the experience will be very different. And if I'm doing it with another person, they will know. Like your kids will know if you're spending time, money, energy, attention, but sorry, time, money, and energy, but not your attention. They know the difference.
I want to come back to the industry and maybe ask you some uncomfortable or dangerous questions.
Sweet.
It's a I mean, what a massive world we live in, Carl, right? So, we've got wirehouses, private banks, independent broker dealers, insurance broker dealers, our in world of independent RIAs, and then you go overseas and there's tons of other structures as well. And, if there's one thing we probably learned from Econ 101, it's that incentives matter. That where you stand depends on where you sit. So if you're paid to sell a product, you're going to sell a product. You might care about the customer, but ultimately the incentive is to sell the product. First question here is, can anyone be a real financial advisor, or do they have to be in a particular seat with a particular set of incentives? Because I bet you there's lots of people who have product selling incentives that are really good people. And we know some of those people, right? But but can they deliver what you would call, unapologetically real, not fake, real financial planning from that seat?
Such a good question. Um, I've always really struggled with, because some of the years ago, it was probably like, I don't know, years ago, I noticed, and you've run into this a lot, I'm sure, that so I had journalist friends who, when I would mention that there were real financial planners, they would say like cute story. Like they would say something like you mean like the butcher, the baker, the candlestick maker, like they were a fairy tale. And so I started thinking about. I first said I was like, it's like there's this secret society of real financial planners, and and somebody asked me like, well, how do you define that? And I remember saying, well, it's who I would send Sharon to. That's my mom's name. Like, does Sharon like you? Right. That's how I would. I'm the one that coined the phrase. I get to decide. It's like, would Sharon like you as the T-shirt? And then I was like going through the list of people who I would send a friend to or my mom to. Some of them were at places that are dealing with lots of conflicts, and like our super independent friends would say, "How could you ever?" But they had so I that the point there is like, I don't think there isn't a conflict free way. If I'm going to charge you money for a service I provide in any form, there's a conflict. Right? If I do it hourly, our hourly friends that wave the conflict banner so high, well, we all know, how does that feel with an attorney? Why'd you take so long? How could that have taken you 12 hours? Like there's a conflict, right? And some of those conflicts are better or worse. I think the most important thing, to me, the most important thing is that it's transparent. And that's where I think we get to some of the problems you're pointing to, is when there was in the old days, right? And there still is a bunch of this, but in the old days, it was the only option. And there was embedded commissions that the client didn't even know they were paying. I remember like $5 million muni bond portfolio client saying, you know, XYZ brokerage firm doesn't charge me anything. I was like, oh, that's fascinating. They're a nonprofit. I didn't know that. And then when all I had to do was show them the difference between the spreads, and that I remember those days when you could literally choose, right? Like I could choose how much I wanted to take as a commission that the client never knew about, because all they knew about was I could just adjust the yield up or down. That's not conflict. That's not a transparent conflict. So I sort of, in answer to your question, can somebody sitting in a seat where, and I often think about this in insurance, It's changing, but for years there was no fee. The good insurance products had embedded commissions. There was no fee, and the best product for the client would pay an advisor a commission. I still know advisors now, real financial planners, who are like, I can't do that because it's a commission, and fee only means I can't take a commission. But it's the best product for the client. So that's still the struggle we all have. And I think one way to vector on that struggle is disclosure, transparency and disclosure, right? If that's one way, like if you, one way I would measure a real financial planner would be, are you really, really clear about two things? How much you as the client pay them, and number two, how much they are compensated for your relationship. Those can often be two separate. I would think it's fair to say, in an ideal world, they'd be the same thing. What the client pays is what the full compensation of what the advisor gets. But sometimes they're not. That does not mean that it's a bad advisor. It just means make sure they're willing to disclose both of these things. Is that okay? That's my rudimentary way of looking at it.
I don't have enough. I mean, is that of course of course that's okay. I think that you know firms in our industry in the U.S. and globally are not going to stop selling products on which there are commissions. And I do think, if I have an opinion here, that we just can't punt and say, well, you can never be a quote unquote real planner, because part of this is, well, are you equipped to have the conversation that we want them to have? Putting these conversation grenades into the space and dislodging the legacy understandings. And there's probably also an element, I think you alluded to this, of transparency, like what's actually happening in this relationship commercially. The problem there becomes it gets really complicated really quickly. It's hard for almost any. I started my career. I was hired by Christine Benz 26 years ago at Morningstar, and to get into the weeds of like, well, who's being compensated how across all of these different firms and distribution partners, it's a bit of a brain cramp. And to be fair to those selling the products, those buying the products, in many cases, we know don't want to know. They would rather, would you rather have an embedded $5,000 fee that you're not aware of, or do you rather write a $1,000 check? I'd rather pay 5,000 and not know about it.
Can we talk about that for a minute? Because I'm super curious from your perspective, right? The sometimes, because there's a statement that was in my first book that was around like the portfolio design, the investment process only matters to the degree that it influences behavior. And you and I both know that there are sometimes things that are suboptimal to the return, but have a massive impact on behavior, right? And so I mean, a simple example of this is, dollar cost averaging is never the optimal strategy in advance, right? You don't know. Like it's normally invest when you have.
At any one moment, it's not the best strategy.
Exactly. Invest when you have the money is what the data says, right? Like invest when you have the money. But we also know that if you have $1 million of a client's money in cash and you put the entire $1 million, you're taking a huge behavioral risk, right? Because the very next day, if it goes down, you've got a big number to talk about. Versus if you're dollar cost averaging over 12 months, 10 months with 100,000 a time. So sometimes there are like spreadsheet suboptimal, and one of those would be costs. I even think sometimes like lockup periods are super fascinating to think about. Like if you have a surrender charge, heaven forbid, a surrender charge in an annuity, which again, I'm not arguing for these things, but it's so interesting to think about, like in service of the client's long-term goals, how do we navigate all this conflict and complexity? And I was also thinking about like life insurance. If I'm a client and there's two products and one of them is better for me, but you get paid a commission, and the other one is a little bit not quite as good for me, and it's fee only, which one do I want you to pick as the client? So it's just really interesting when you start thinking about behavior and product design and relationship design, suddenly you get into some really interesting terrain that doesn't fit in the spreadsheet all the time, or the disclosures.
No, 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 and yeah, and it's a function of clear communication, transparency, understanding incentives, all those sorts of things. I mean, so you mentioned sort of making investments to serve a behavioral purpose. One of the things I've been wanting to ask you for actually quite some time is sort of, have you, how do I put it? To what extent have you been surprised, or what's been your reaction to how well this notion of the behavior gap has been received? I mean, it's your nomenclature, it's your email, it's your big book, et cetera. You coined it in a just a simple and powerful and elegant way, and now it's everywhere, that there's this behavior gap. Are you sort of, in retrospect, surprised that the industry has sort of embraced that notion as powerfully as it has?
First, I've got to just thinking about whether or not I ag agree with the premise of me naming it or me. I mean, I'm okay with the idea that I came up with a name. I first called it, Brian, like the very first time I wrote about this, it was the emotional gap. And then I was like, no, behavior's better. But yeah, there's two things I'm really surprised by, that and the one page plan. I'm surprised in the same three, and simple drawings. All three of those, um, in hindsight, not before, I realized, like, one of my friends, his name's Rob, helped me with this, that the projects I'm most interested in are when I see a problem that needs to change. And the behavior gap was purely me trying to figure out, like, what's going on here? Why? And the degree to which it exists, right? Like, I don't even know that anymore. I know that there's one really prominent group that puts a number on it that I'm not comfortable with, a really big number. And then there's another group called Morningstar that puts a much different number on it that I'm much more comfortable with. It seems to be there. Like, whether it's 20 basis points or 100 basis points, I don't know, but I know it's not six, by the way. And then the degree to which people have grabbed onto that and said, that's my value, without realizing that most of the money that the data is coming from with the behavior gap is advised money. And so often we have been part of the problem in helping create, because we're so close to it. Like, so that's been really interesting to me to watch. That the one page plan was heresy when it came out, and now it's accepted doctrine. Like, I took a lot of heat for that.
Heat because, well, I'm not familiar with why heat, because overly simplistic, too cute.
Too cute. I go to lots of conferences now. Like, back then it was heresy. Now I go to conferences and there's almost always a breakout session around one page plans, and nobody knows I had anything to do with it, which is awesome. It's part of the design of the project. So I just think, if we can notice a problem in the world that we think needs to be, I I wouldn't. I think there's always risk when you look back and create cute stories about things. So I wouldn't even say I noticed a problem. I would say I personally was having a problem with my clients making behavioral mistakes. And then I thought it was just me. I went and got my SEMA designation, and I built really detailed, rigorous ways to manage your search and selection, right? And then 24 months later, I realized I built a really detailed way to buy high and sell low. And I was about to leave the industry. I was about to go to law school, because that's what my grandpa did. Because I thought it was just me. I was like, look, if I have the best training and I can't do this. And that's when I ran into some of this research. And I was like, oh, it's not just kids from the hills in Utah. So first it was just a problem I had. Then I realized it was a problem. And I was like, wow, it's a big problem. And so I was like, I'm going to work on this problem. It's what's kept me in the industry after getting into it by accident. It's what's kept me in the industry. Is now I think it's any behavior Now I think of the behavior gap as any well-intentioned behavior that produces a suboptimal result.
Let's pivot from behavior to values, but they're quite adjacent. And one thing that you wrote about, I think, value collisions, kind of triggered me. It, it,
It's my favorite line in the entire book, by the way. If I'll tell you which one. Let me let you finish your question. But if I had to do this entire thing over, 3 years of work for this one line, I would do it. And we'll talk about which one when you get there.
what really grabbed me, and so my prior is in short. We know that in the financial planning process, part of the behavioral wave is, well, let's get to know who our clients are. Let's go deep into their values, their beliefs, their identity. Great. Period. End of paragraph. That's really good. But there's something about the values exercises that I've seen, whether it be a card sort or a digital thing or just a conversational script, where it's like, well, what are your values? And I've tried to do this, and I've had this conversation with Tracy, my wife, and in my own head, like, what are our values? And then you can go to, well, you don't even need AI. You can just Google, like, give me a list of like the main values. And it's like, this is awesome. Like honesty and integrity and diligence and trustworthiness. And you you use this phrase values collisions because we've got, to me, it's not the good stuff in a values-based financial planning isn't articulating our values, it's articulating what happens when two real values are in conflict, and how do we then choose to go left, right, up, down based on that conflict. Because sometimes I'm gonna choose 2 words, I haven't thought this through. Maybe honesty and integrity are in conflict in a particular situation. And then what is the relationship to the financial plan? It becomes messy quickly. So your turn. Like tell me where this term values collision came from, and how do real financial planners or those who aspire to be such have values laden conversations that are not pablum but purposeful.
Yeah, love that. Um, I so a couple things. One, I've started thinking more about purpose, a sense of purpose than than values. And I like that framing a lot, like what it means to have a sense of purpose. And I'm still a work in progress, but the values collision piece, my examples would be we have weighted really heavily on as a family, we value adventure a lot. That's what led us to New Zealand and London, and we value adventure a lot. And man, at the same time, I sure wish I had a little bit of stability. So that's a really important. And in the book, I use future and now. Those are again, but I think more rich is this idea of like adventure stability, and and what I've realized, it started a lot of, I mean, in our family, we call them heated discussions, but I think it'd be fair to call them fights. Started a lot of arguments or fights because my wife would be like, "We gotta go." Like the New Zealand idea was her idea, and I fought it tooth and nail. It was just like, "Well, no, you can't do it. I'm in the middle of my like the height of my career. Like you can't. What are you talking about?" So lots of fighting, and the line that I'm really proud of in that book that I worked on for 27 years, this line is, your values aren't at war, they're in conversation. And I think that's what a real planner can help people do. And I think one thing that I'm sure you would agree, like I'm much more interested, we can start with your guesses. And again, we'd never say this to clients. I don't mean it demeaning. It's about me. Like we could start with our cute little guesses about what our values are. We start with those. But really cool in the financial planning process of the relationship is we start to get revealed preferences. So now I can start to notice, the checkbook and the calendar never lie. So it's interesting to me what you say is important to you, but I have access to your transactions and I'll tell you what's currently actually important to you. And if I can do that in a gentle enough, sometimes it's a punch in the nose, metaphorically, but most of the time it's an empathetic hug. Like, let me give you an example. I remember I had a client who was like, in the first meeting that they said, "Oh man, I just want to spend more time with my daughter, and I'd love the way I'd like to do that is coach her soccer team, and I just can't. I don't have the time right now. Work. I'm just working a lot." He had a paid off car, and I was like, and the paid off car is important. A couple months later, 6 months, year later, something, still not spending enough time with his daughter, not coaching the soccer team. Comes to me and says, "I'd like to get a new car, but I'm going to need to lease it." And so there was a payment, as I recall, it was early Tesla days, and so there was a payment that was not unsubstantial. And I remember thinking in my mind, like, "Oh no, I got a value. I really want to spend more time with coach my daughters. This is what you told me, not my values, yours. Keep your values off the client's plans. Important, right?" So, uh, and I've got a behavior now, a revealed preference that says I may want to get a new car, lease it, which would put more pressure on me needing to work longer. So I was just like, do I have permission to enter this conversation in my head? And the line I used, which was, "Hey, you may fire me as your financial advisor for what I'm about to ask you, but you should definitely fire me if I don't ask you." And we started by saying, "Let me clarify something. You told me this. Is this still true?" A daughter, soccer team, whole thing. If you didn't lease the car, could, and you just kept driving it, could that release enough pressure to use that time to coach the soccer team? Like, is this an okay conversation? That's an example of a real simple example of a chance to deal with, can we have a conversation about it? Can my wife and I talk about adventure versus stability in conversation, not war? And so when I started living with that tension, I was like, oh, it's not a war. These are both good things. It's just tension between them. That's how I think about it.
What follows is that the best financial advice facilitates the conversation.
That's right. You just need to be a master of gentle, sometimes abrupt, like the chess match, the dance, the art of our business is knowing the difference between a punch in the nose and an empathetic hug and how to give them both at the right time. Checkers and chess, another good example, right?
I mean, my partner, Dr. Joy Leary, talks a lot about choosing between change and acceptance. That in some cases we intervene and we are there to accept what is. And even if it's not even if it's suboptimal, even if we think it could be better in the abstract, sometimes our job is to just accept what is and create that hug, be empathetic to frame that. And in other cases, it's to inspire change. And so my other colleague, Dr. Meg Lertz, who has done all this wonderful work on trans-theoretical model of change applied to financial planning, well, there's a change facilitation process, but prior to, sort of acceptance and change is the real advisor or any advisor or coach or guide or frankly friend who says, how am I going to play this? Am I going to embolden in a very positive way what is, or am I going to nudge, or to use your phrase, punch in the nose, someone to say, you know what, there is a better path. And by the way, there's no algorithm for this, right? Like there is just experience and wisdom. And I think that's the best we can do. All right. So I think so. We're well over an hour. I want to do, I've never done a lightning round before, but you've got so many lines in the book that I want you to reflect on. I want listeners and readers to reflect on. I'm going to give you three and maybe just give me your quick insight and inspiration, less than 30 or 45 seconds on each. I'm going to give you three. All right. The first is problems are stories. What do you mean? Because I love that. Problems are stories.
Yeah, I think that when I think about saying I have a problem, it is almost always a projection of something that may, and very importantly, or may not happen in the future. And I am so good at creating the scenario where it feels very real. And I've been so surprised, endlessly surprised, at how like a week later, an hour later, a month later, somebody will say, "Hey, whatever happened to that?" And I'll be like, "Oh yeah, I forgot about the thing." Turned out it was just a story about something that may or may not happen in the future. It wasn't really the problem had me. I didn't have the problem.
Second of three. Plans are guesses.
Yeah, all models. Yeah, I don't know who said this, but all models are wrong. Some are useful.
That was George Box, by the way.
There we go. Yeah, all models are on some are useful, and I love the idea of inserting the word guess as a playful suggestion to the mind. That, like it's okay. It doesn't reduce the technical importance. It doesn't diminish it. I don't mean to, at least, but it suggests to the mind like, hey, we're just imagining. We're just picturing a future. Relax, right? That's what I mean there.
Lastly, money buys happiness.
Yeah, who was that? Elizabeth Dunn, who
But Dunn and Norton wrote a good book called Happy Money. But you detailed in, I don't have which chapter or drawing it was, but you said, "Hey, folks, we're supposed to," it's sort of the polite thing you're supposed to say, money doesn't buy happiness. And what you said is hooey. And I happen to agree. I've written about this a lot as well. But you were quite concrete about this. And so maybe as our kind of departing concept, this idea that in some cases, money buys happiness in one way or another.
Yeah, my short, real quick response to you saying money buys happiness would be if you know how to spend it. If you know how to spend it. Like it, and by the way, we can give you a hint. Your work would give you a hint. Um, People, experiences, and helping. And sometimes those can be all three together.
Um, so this was awesome. Um, Thank you so much for just being like really here.
Yeah, you made it easy. So thank you.
For those who don't know how to find you, I don't know who wouldn't, but tell us again the name of the book, where to find it, where to be in touch with you.
Yeah, so Your Money, Reimagining Wealth Through 101 Simple Sketches. You can buy it anywhere. My favorite suggestion is buy a copy at Amazon and a copy at your local bookstore and give one away because we love local bookstores. And unfortunately, Amazon matters. And then if you want to keep up with the work I'm doing, Behavior Gap, the weekly letter is probably the best place. So go to behaviorgap.com, sign up for the weekly letter.
All right. Well, Carl, thank you so much. This has been Chopping Wealth. I'm Brian Portnoy, and I'm sure you enjoyed this as much as I did. We'll see you on the next episode. Thank you very much.
Cheers, Brian.